The United States needs allies more than ever and is destroying the strongest alliance it ever had. It is crystal clear, if you study World Wars I and II, one of the central features of that period and crucial in shaping the path to war were contending colonialisms. These are the behaviors, like with Britain, of a colonial power whose position in the world, as we've discussed, is shrinking, who is challenged more and more by China.
Is the world on the brink of a global war? What is the future of global stability, and will NATO be dissolved soon? What is the likely European response to Trump doubling down on taking Greenland? We're going to find out with the next guest, Richard Wolff, co-founder of Democracy at Work and professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the show. Good to see you again.
Thank you very much, David. Glad to be here.
I want to start by talking about what the U.S. has in mind. So take a look at this letter that was just penned by President Donald Trump to the Norwegian Prime Minister. This was released, I believe, yesterday. I had to fact check whether or not this was indeed a real letter. It seems to be true. It seems, according to actually the official press, that this is not fake. Although people in the comments, if you disagree with this, let me know. But I'll just read this letter to you if you haven't seen it. Dear Jonas, Prime Minister of Norway, considering your country did not give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but now can think about what is good and proper for the United States of America. Denmark cannot protect that land, I think he's talking about Greenland, from Russia or China, and why do we have a right of ownership anyway? There are no written documents, it's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago, but we also had boats landing there. I have done more for NATO than any other person since its founding, and now NATO should do something for the United States. The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of Greenland. Thank you, President Donald J. Trump. I'll just stop here and get your reaction to this, and before I continue with the rest of my questioning.
Well, I think for those who had not noticed how Mr. Trump functions, this is a nice, short introduction to pretty much all you need to know as to how he organizes his understanding of world events, past and present, and a good bit of the future as well. I think the best way to understand what is going on is to look a little bit at the history, because it also will, as I'll show you, it will suggest where this is going. And I am not an alarmist person, never have been. I don't believe I can predict the future any better than anyone else can, which is to say, we can't do that. Nonetheless, here we go. Capitalism as a system has, to its credit or discredit, depending on your point of view, the remarkable causative role played in World Wars I and II, the worst conflagrations, to my knowledge, that the human race has inflicted upon itself in its history. It is crystal clear, if you study World Wars I and II in the 20th century just past, that one of the central features of that period and crucial in shaping the path to war were contending colonialisms. In the case of World War I, let me help everyone remember, at that time, the dominant empire in the world was the British Empire. The sun never set on the British Empire. From Ireland at one end to India at the other, and countless countries in between, the British were it. But in the 19th century, the preceding century, 2 or 3 countries began to contest in a serious way the dominance of Britain. Most important was Germany. Secondly, the United States, itself a former colony of Britain. and number 3, Japan. In World War II, alliances based on the preceding 50 years of friction among competing colonial countries, carving up Africa, carving up domination in Asia, and on, were so astounding that only a war on the scale of World War I could have brought people to their senses to realize that if we don't do something as a species, we are going to destroy ourselves. So we did something. We created something called the League of Nations right after World War I, based on the premise this is a necessary step to avoid anything like that happening again. Skipping over a lot of detail, 3 countries withdrew from the League of Nations, having been members, in the case of Japan, from its beginning, in the case of Germany and Italy, from various other times. They all were members, but Japan, Italy, and Germany withdrew in the early 1930s when the Japanese invaded China, and when Mussolini, shortly after he took over in Italy, and likewise Hitler in 1933 in Germany. The withdrawal of 3 major industrial nations bent on expansion, the Japanese and the mainland and Philippines and so on in Asia, Germany across Europe into Russia, Italy into Africa. I could go on. And we had another world war. After that, we decided with even greater intensity to do something to prevent this from happening again. We created the United Nations. Even enemies like the United States and Russia, launched in a Cold War, joined the United Nations and worked for a long time within its framework. Mr. Trump has now withdrawn in all effective ways from the United Nations, from many of its agencies formally, from participation all but formally, and whether he is a member or not, what he did in Venezuela, what he's doing in Greenland, bombing the church in the village in Nigeria. I could go on. These are the behaviors, like with Britain, of a colonial power whose position in the world, as we've discussed, is shrinking, who is challenged more and more by China on the one hand and the BRICS alliance that the Chinese have built on the other, and trying both symbolically and in real terms as a flailing, declining power to hold on, to grab more, to somehow try to change the arc of a history that points at a future it will not have.
Before we continue with the video, let's talk about today's sponsor, Delete Me. Most New Year's resolutions fail because they require constant effort, but protecting your online privacy doesn't have to. Your personal information, like your name, address, and phone number, is often collected and sold by data broker sites. That's why I use Delete Me, a service that helps reduce that exposure. It takes about 5 minutes to set up, and then they handle the work for you all year. They scan for where your information appears and submit removal requests to hundreds of broker sites. I've been using it for more than a year now, and they have reviewed over 325 listings to see if any data brokers have my personal information, and they continue to check to make sure it stays off. Go to joindeleteme.com/DavidLin, link down below, or scan the QR code here and use DavidLin, that's my promo code, at checkout to get 20% off all consumer plans. Take control of your online privacy today before somebody else does. Now back to the video. I like to play for you this clip, an old archive of Joe Biden in 1995 commenting on Europe and the relationship, and the Europeans' relationship with America. And let's just take a listen and we'll comment together. It may have something to do with how the world is shaping out today.
Cannot stay united without the United States. There is no moral center in Europe. When in the last 2 centuries had the French or the British or the Germans or the Belgians or the Italians moved in a way to unify that continent? And the only reason anything is happening now is because the United States of America finally is understanding her role. So we do have a national interest. Our national interest goes well beyond the genocide that will spread like a cancer. But
do you share that sentiment that the Europeans need a global superpower in the form of either the United States or somebody else in order to stay unified?
I agree that the Europeans have not been able to achieve that goal, and that Mr. Biden was correct. But the arrogance, the mind-bending arrogance to suggest that the United States, instead of being caught up in the same economic logic of Europe, and therefore owing the world the kind of, how shall I put it, decency and modesty to ask, how can we do better than the future? But to assert that the United States will do it, it's pathetic. You know what it is? It's Mr. Biden wanting, in his way, to do what Mr. Trump is doing, to pretend by bluster and bravado and that kind of speaking that the United States has some magic wand to achieve world peace that the Europeans lack. Yes, the Europeans failed. 2 catastrophic wars, killing, the estimates are 100 to 200 million people, directly, indirectly, when you add it all up, is an unbelievable admission of failure that has to be faced. But the United States, so far from being the solution, is now demonstrating the exact same behavior. Do we really want to risk a war by capturing Venezuelan oil so that the Chinese, who've been buying a good bit of it, won't get it anymore? You think that's going to solve something? The Chinese, we have tried, the United States, to hold back China's development for 40 years. And you know what? It's a roaring failure, Republican and Democrats alike. You don't stop the process of history. Britain wanted to stop the United States, went to war twice, lost twice, and is now a bare footnote to the United States. Nothing Mr. Starmer is going to do is going to change that. All the blather that comes out of his mouth, wow. No, I'm struck. I think you picked wonderful examples that it's a bipartisan effort here in this country. And what do I mean? To deny what's going on, not to come up with a solution for it.
Why did Trump bring up the Monroe Doctrine several times in the last month after the capture of Venezuelan President Maduro? And now he's coining the term Monroe Doctrine to refer to, I guess, his own version. Can you just give us a quick, brief history lesson on what the Monroe Doctrine is and how that may be applicable, if at all, in the 21st century?
Well, Biden and Bush and that whole generation of leaders thought that they were, in effect, a unipolar hegemon, if I can use the language academics use, that with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989 and 1990, the United States emerges, true enough, as the global superpower. Nobody could compare to it. But it was the height of arrogance and, if you pardon me, ignorance to imagine that very unusual and anomalous situation would last. Of course it wouldn't. It couldn't. And indeed, it hasn't. And what we see is the rise of yet another power, just like the United States rose from being a small, inconsequential corner of the British Empire to literally reverse the role between colony and colonizer. And so the Chinese and, in their turn, the Russians and the people of India and will find their time and their place in the sun. Indeed, in many ways, they follow and learn from what the Europeans used to do, which is a mixed blessing, to say the least. But the reality is you can't stop it. You might be able to work out a live and let live deal, but you're sure as heaven not going to do it by snatching Mr. Maduro or grabbing Greenland or grabbing the island of Diego Garcia, if you saw today's headlines in that part of the world. There's something childish going on here that we will look back on, shake our heads in disbelief that we would do. The United States needs allies more than ever and is destroying the strongest alliance it ever had, the one with Europe. When people behave in that way, you stop using the normal metrics and you begin to say, what in the world could justify such crazy behavior? And the answer is watching that all of the earlier efforts to stop the decline of the United States, to stop the decline of the West, to stop the decline of colonialism. I mean, let me be as stark as I can, David. 2 centuries ago, you could settle your own people all over the world in what we call settler colonialism. Yeah. That's the history of the United States, of Australia, of New Zealand, of South Africa, and so on. But we live in the age of anti-colonialism. You can't do it anymore, which is why when you try, Israel in Gaza, the United States now under Mr. Trump, you are leaving the realm of what's possible. You're trying to do what's historically impossible, and you end up with genocide and ridicule after people get over the shock of how you are badly handling your own decline.
Well, let's just take a look at what's coming up in the future. Let's speculate as to what will happen both in Europe and in South America. Starting with Europe, there's a theory out there, Professor Wolff, that the main reason that Donald Trump wants Greenland is because he wants to disband NATO. He wants a reason or an excuse to just leave NATO because it's not in the interest of the United States. I'll let you comment on that. And certainly when you think about it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to want Greenland as a landmass. The U.S. could just ask for more military bases if they deem it necessary to maintain national security there. So what do you think of using Greenland as an excuse to disband NATO? And more broadly, what is the future of NATO?
I think the reality is that for a long time, the United States has believed that it either ought to get a great deal more out of Europe or set it aside. That is, it's really not a question. They're not worried about them on grounds of alliance, because they basically tell themselves, where are they going to go? It's a little late if they want to switch sides. And besides which, the people in charge in Europe, the last thing they would want to do is be allies with the only other global bloc, because that's China and Russia, and the Europeans are terrified of that. And they're not doing that. A new group of leaders in Europe might go in that direction. And if I were a betting person, that's what I would guess is coming in Europe. You're going to blow the current leadership, the Merz, the Macron, the Keir Starmer, right out of the picture. They're going to disappear and become faint memories. And to give you an example, the dominant power in the National Assembly of France is the left, not the right. It's a coalition of the communists and socialists, all of them working together, which they haven't been able to do. But now they're doing it in France. If I were paying attention, pay attention there. That's a sign of something, that the French left could coalesce and become the dominant bloc in the National Assembly. One of the reasons Mr. Macron is not just a lame duck, he is a dead duck politically. He's zero, counts for nothing because he's an anomaly in his own country. But for the United States, they want tribute. They want the Europeans to give them more, or else they want to cut them loose because they think they can do it better on their own if they can basically replace Europe with the United States. It's not so much doing away with them. They imagine them kind of fading away and the United States occupying the space on this planet that used to be occupied by the United States and Europe. They want to complete the emergence of the United States so it isn't just the British Empire replacement, it's the replacement for all of the empire, French, Dutch, German, all of them. And my guess is in their fantasy, you can see it. In the early, give you one example, in the early days of the war in Ukraine, there were confident predictions by our president at that time, Joe Biden, and the people around him, that the defeat of Russia, which they assured us was coming, by the way, a wonderful index of their grasp of the realities, that the defeat of Russia could, and they hoped would, lead to, I'm quoting now, the breakup of Russia into many small countries that would be much easier to maintain a dominant relationship with. Wow. Talk about imaginary. You can't win the war in Ukraine. You've already lost it, but you're full of predictions. And those predictions, I think, give you a hint of where they imagine they might be able to go. And grabbing Maduro and grabbing Greenland, these are ways of signaling this is what we're about. We're going to do that. And we're not going to be held back by laws, by rules, by United Nations, by history. We're going to, this is a kind of gusto mentality which Americans think is cute and has something to do with the frontier, but looks to the rest of the world like we're out of our minds.
Well, let's figure out speculate as to what the Europeans' next move may be. So Donald Trump posted this on Truth Social today, a text message that Emmanuel Macron supposedly sent him. My friend, we are totally in line on Syria. We can do great things on Iran. I do not understand what you're doing on Greenland. Let's try to build great things. I can set up a G7 meeting after Davos in Paris on Thursday afternoon. I can invite the Ukrainians, the Danish, and the Syrians, and the Russians in the margins. Coincidentally, the Danish pension fund, one of the Danish pension funds, Academiker Pension, excuse me if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, has just sold $100 million worth of U.S. treasuries, which is an inconsequential amount in the grand scheme of things, but still it's a step in the direction that people feared the Europeans would take, which is to sell U.S. assets. So let me just get your take, Professor. What do you think is the likely European response to what the U.S. is doing right now?
I think the likely response is, among the leaders they have now, to be blunt with you, the likely response is exactly what you just showed. Getting down on your knees, begging for a meeting. What's to me? What is a meeting going to do? They've had, I can't even count them, 50 meetings in the last 3 years on the war in Ukraine, which has effectively done nothing. The Russians keep winning. The Russians keep taking more territory. Ukraine is a basket case of a country and becoming more so every day. Come on. And the United States has withdrawn. They couldn't stop the Russians with the United States. What in the world is Europe going to do without it? The answer, nothing. Babble. The one thing the Europeans are doing with a clear voice is demonizing Russia. They are going to their people in every European country and painting as horrific a picture of Russia as they know how to do. You know, it's a division of labor. Europe demonizes Russia, and the United States demonizes China. And both of the demonizers are passing down in history. And you know who they're demonizing? The up-and-coming countries who are waiting for their chance in the limelight. What we are teaching the people who will come after us is to treat us with disdain and disrespect, because that's what we're doing with them. This is not a way of dealing. You know, a country that wants to come to terms with its own decline can express a desire for change in Greenland or Panama, but not dictatorially. Do you really think that mobilizing the whole world against the United States, which is what we are doing now, even our oldest allies, Mexico, Canada, you don't have to go to the pension fund in Denmark to see the reaction. Go to the statistics on Canadians not coming to the United States for tourism. I'm a professor. I've been getting invitations to transfer and teach in Canadian universities. There's a whole special program that they've just developed for the people like us. I'm almost quoting to you a letter saying, if you're thinking about a more secure place for you and your family, well, you know, the sad answer is I am surrounded by professors who are thinking like that in ways they have never done in their entire lifetimes. And that's a better index of where we are than the bluster of neither Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump.
Well, we have 10 minutes left in this conversation. I'd like to close off on going back to the Americas. So talking about Canada, good segue. This is what PM Mark Carney had to say recently. By the way, as you recall, there was a recent meeting between Carney and Xi Jinping in China, where Canada just made a historic deal to lower tariffs on Chinese EVs, which, by the way, I think it's 6-point-something%, which is lower.
6.1% reduced from 100%.
Yeah, and it's much lower now than American cars. So now, anyway, that's a different issue, but Ford in Canada is not happy. Take a listen to what Carney had to say regarding what he calls a new world order.
As you mentioned, mine is the first visit of a Canadian Prime Minister to China in nearly a decade. The world has changed much since that last visit. And I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
Behind him is the Saskatchewan, the governor of Saskatchewan. But anyway, the premier of Saskatchewan. But anyway, what is he referring to? I think people were a little bit confused at the words he was using here.
Well, I think they should pay attention to the words. They're very remarkable. The premier of Saskatchewan is sitting next to him because Saskatchewan is a place where you grow a lot of grain, and grain is a constituent of canola oil, with which Americans are familiar. Canola oil is now going to go to China. Canadian oil, and it's a wonderful piece of news for the farmers of Canada and a very bad piece of news for the farmers in other parts of the world who are not going to be providing the canola. And that includes American farmers, Australian farmers, and so on. China is throwing its weight around. It's doing it in a very smart way. It is saying to Canada, position yourself for what's coming, because otherwise you are hanging on to relationships that are not only not going to help you in the future, but are spitting in your face right here in the present. And nothing is more important than what the Canadians there are doing. They are the greatest partner the United States has, the biggest single trading partner in the world. Mexico and Canada, numbers 1 and 2. So doing away with your relationship with them is a very strange behavior, unless you're a megalomaniac with an idea that you're going to take over the whole world. And that item with the electric vehicles, let me drive home something in case people are not aware. The United States had 100%, and Mr. Trump used to give them 27%. Then he raised it to 100%. No, excuse me, Mr. Biden did that, and Mr. Trump has maintained it. So an electric car or truck coming from China, for example, from their leading company, the BYD Corporation, has to double its price. If it costs $30,000 to bring it from China, you got to pay $60,000 here, $30,000 to get the car shipped, and another $30,000 to Uncle Sam to release the car from the port where it arrives, because it's 100% tariff. Wow, no wonder you don't see BYD anywhere in the United States. Oh, wait a minute, you do. Where is that? In Texas, in Arizona. Why is that? Because Mexico allows those cars in at a much, much lower tariff. And Americans wanting them. Why? Because the Chinese produce the lowest price, highest quality electric vehicles in the world. They won that competition. Americans are crossing the border into Mexico, buying the car and bringing it back in. And you know something? Now that Canada has signed a deal, by the way, the deal is for 50,000, 49,000 to be exact, 49,000 electric vehicles to be brought into Canada. Americans are going to be doing that too. So we're going to have them on our southern border. We're going to have Chinese electric vehicles on the north. When Americans begin to understand that they could get the best electric car for cheaper than they're paying Tesla or GM or Ford or Toyota, it's going to be like everything else I'm talking about with you, unstoppable historically. And the last 400 years are my proof. We are behaving like a petulant child in the world economy. And the rest of the world uses a different word, rogue. And that's what they think is happening here. And how are we going to argue otherwise?
Certainly, supporters of Carney's recent visit to China would say that consumers would benefit from lower tariffs and free trade. But do you think that Canada made a strategic error by partnering with China now and making this deal, signaling more deals to come, at a time when they could be supporting the U.S. more vocally on the world stage on these geopolitical issues that we talked about? Basically, Carney's making a very clear and visible pivot away from what you just described as their greatest ally and partner up to date.
Yes, he's taking a chance. And you have to ask yourself, because everything you just said is correct. You have to ask yourself, why would he do such a thing? Without even asking the political question. You know, he's relatively new at his job. He just won an election a year or so ago. You know, he is charting out a whole, he's going to sink or swim with the decision that he's made, which is even more than the question, why would he do that? And I'll give you the answer. Because he has no option. Because the United States has shown him, not just by what Mr. Trump has done, but by the failure, both of the, what shall I call them, the business elite in the United States, the ruling class, if you like, and that includes the leadership of the Democratic Party. No one is opposing Mr. Trump in a fundamental way. No one is mobilizing against his policies. And the reality of that means that the Canadians, not just Mr. Carney, but the Canadians are realizing the cost of staying with the United States is being raised exponentially without an end. Whereas the Chinese are saying, we don't ask you to do anything here. Let's just cut a deal. Good for you, because you can sell your canola here. Good for us. We can sell our electric vehicles to you. We're not asking for anything. Do whatever you want. Meanwhile, of course, what is happening is that you are developing more and more people inside Canada who are going to be buying or selling these electric vehicles therefore wanting that business to continue, wanting to expand it, which they will do, and they will petition the Canadian government to help them. In other words, China is doing what is exactly the way a rising economic power becomes ever larger. It's what the United States did when it replaced the old British, French, and other empires around the world. It just feels nice when you're doing it, and it doesn't feel nice when it's being done to you.
Let's leave it here on this note. Plenty more to discuss next time. We'll see how this develops. Thank you very much, Professor Wolff. Where can we follow you and study your work in the meantime?
Very easy. democracyatwork.info is the website, and democracy.substack.com is our fast-growing Substack community. Everything we do is available there.
I just want to finish on this one note, and you can answer this in 30 seconds or less. How do you feel right now? This is a sentiment question. Is this all noise to you, or are you genuinely concerned about this new world order?
I'm generally concerned. The history that I gave at the beginning of our conversation is a history that is very much in my mind. I should mention to you, for transparency, both my mother was born in Germany, in Berlin, my father in France. I'm born in America. Why? Because my parents were refugees from World War II. I feel it in my bones, and of course, I take it very seriously.
Well, do make sure to follow Professor Wolff and Democracy at Work. Links down below. Thank you again. Appreciate your time. We'll speak next time. Thank you.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.